So, welcome to the Agile Coaching Exchange, the first for 2026. As we kick off the new year, we're actually kicking off a new theme, which is back to basics. So, the Agile Coaching Exchange has been around for over 13 years. Who would believe it? And me and Ben have been here since. And even our guest speaker was one of the founding people for the Agile Coaching Exchange. So, that's quite exciting. So we're kicking off with our back to basics because there's so many new people coming into our world. And so therefore I think it's a great opportunity to revisit and go back to really what Scrum is. Because even as a coach, I'm still hearing some of those key words that make you shudder. And you think, there's definitely lots of information to be learned. So I want to introduce to you Mark Summers. I did try and find some really embarrassing photos of Mark, but sadly, all of the ones that I have got of him are quite professional. But
What?
the reason, but the reason why I was going to do that is because mine and Mark's friendship dates back to 2008, and that is because when I first got into the Agile world, Mark was one of the original consultants that came into the company I was working at the time. So he helped to build my strong foundations of Agile, Scrum, and others within his company helped me to move to be the Kanban queen that I am today. But he was right there in the beginning, rookie Helen, when I was fresh off the project management job description. So it's always fabulous to have Mark come and join us and tell us all about Scrum. So I'm going to hand over to you, Mark.
So thank you, Helen. It's nice to be back at the Agile Coaching Exchange. In 2012, the original sessions were in the Littleton Arms, just outside Mornington Crescent Tube Station in London. Definitely fond memories of doing that. So Helen asked me to speak about back to basics was the theme, talking about Scrum. So I'm not sure how back to basics to go. I'm not going to make it about the events and all that, but we can. What I would welcome it is kind of as we go through kind of questions and stuff like that. So we will do like baselines and stuff like that, but then we're kind of going to go explore some kind of scenarios, patterns, anti-patterns, and hopefully that'll seed some questions and stuff like that. A little bit about me. So I started with Scrum back in 2006. I was working in an organization where, we've been doing projects. And as the world got more complex, we noticed they were started going red, 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 red. Sorry, green, green, green until we were about to deliver, and then they went red. So we needed to change something, and we kind of got into the world of Scrum. We kind of avoided going down the more Prince 2 route, which we could have done because Scrum seemed to fit our culture better. That kind of collaborative nature of Scrum. That's what really appealed to us. A couple of years later, my wife moved me down from Sheffield, where I was working, to London. And I was looking for jobs as a Scrum Master, but I saw this job as an Agile coach working for this company called Conchango. I didn't really know what it was at the time, but I was probably one of the earlier people to be hired into the role of Agile coaches. I think there was a few people working internally in organizations. And since then, really, I've been working with individuals, teams at different parts of their Agile journey, helping them, with Scrum, Kanban. I'm also the product owner for the Agile Coaching Growth Wheel, and I've worked with both Helen and Ben. Have given me lots of input on that kind of lovely tool. As a tool to help people reflect on where they are on their Agile coaching journey and improve. That's been a community effort that we've been working on. And that's definitely my focus when I work in organizations. How do we build better Scrum Master capability? How do we build those internal change agents? So what I'm going to start with, though, actually in the chat, I just want to get a feel for people's experience. Actually, how long have you been in the Scrummy world? Maybe what year was your first kind of Scrummy adventure? I said mine was 2006. Perhaps we've got some people who've been longer than that. Just pop that in the chat for me. How long have you been in the Scrummy world? 2008? Too long, Ben. 2017, 8, 2010, 2012. Early 2000s, 2016. So lots of experience. I'm hoping we can have some good questions, but I just want to kind of hook us back into the kind of the baseline of 1 week. Okay, so real range of experience. So Scrum framework. So hopefully my screen is spotlighted, not so you can see me, but so that you can kind of just see my my poster here. So let's remind ourselves of what Scrum is. As we go along, actually, I'm going to go through the latest version of Scrum. Scrum has evolved over the time. There's been different Scrum guides and stuff like that. But really, I'm going to use it to talk a little bit more about, the embodiment of Scrum rather than the ceremony and that kind of stuff in itself. So the first thing, of course, we start with Scrum is this idea of a product goal. We used to talk about, having teams need to have a vision, the kind of why behind why we are a team. This is kind of it's formalized it a little bit recently in terms of having this idea of a product goal. Now, when I work with teams these days, I talk about the product goal is it should be something like, what's the outcome that we want to achieve in the next, at most kind of 4 to 5 sprints, so 4 to 5 months or something like that. It's not like what do we want to achieve in the next 18 months. So it needs to be more near term than that. It gives us something to kind of work towards. And of course, the best Scrum teams, it's the whole Scrum teams that are going to be involved in the co-creation of that product goal. One of the big anti-patterns, of course, is when, these goals get created by, business people, maybe it's the product owner, and then handed over to the team. Scrum is about involving the team in all of the work. The product goal, though, is, of course, owned by our first one of our actors, which for some reason they no longer call roles. I personally like the Scrum Master, the product owner, and the developers being known as roles. In the latest version of Scrum, we kind of talk about them as accountabilities. I like to think of them as roles though, because I think being a Scrum Master or being a product owner, is very, very different than being a player actually doing the work. But the product owner is the person, obviously, who is the representative of the business. They are the person who owns that goal. They work with their stakeholders. They work with the team to kind of co-create that. Now, the work in order to achieve that product goal, as we'll all know, is contained within the product backlog. The product backlog, of course, is our list of things we think we might need to do in order to achieve that goal. So that is our kind of product backlog. Yeah. Now, of course, a product owner they can't build great products on their own. They work with a team and they work with the developers. Yeah. So the developers are a cross-functional group of people with all the skills to be able to take those ideas from the product backlog, those design options, and then turn them into working product that has a delivers valuable outcomes to the customers. So, within that team, you'll have people with all different skill sets. We obviously don't just mean, so for those of us who are newer, we don't just mean programmers. We mean all of the skills that we need to successfully deliver a slice of value, an increment of our product. Now, in Scrum, we work in sprints. The typical time boxes are anywhere between less than a month, but that typically means usually 1 to 4 weeks. Yeah. When I first started Scrum, we were kind of working in 4-week sprints, and at the time that seemed quite fast because before we'd kind of been working in release cadences of about 6 months. But these days, I think probably the most typical is 2 weeks. So the sprint itself is like the rhythm, the heartbeat the team get into, so that every 2 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on the length of the sprint, you're going to be focusing on that. What's the goal that we're going to try and achieve in the next 2 weeks, and you're going to be planning that work and then delivering within that cycle. So we work with the developers, and the first thing that we're doing, of course, is we are doing sprint planning. So that is the first one of our events. To save time, I've just kind of written these things out so that I can do this little baseline intro a little bit quicker. Now, there's 3 parts these days to sprint planning. It used to be the kind of what and the how, but they've kind of separated it into the first part is about the why. And the why is where the sprint goal emerges. So the product owner is going to come along to sprint planning, and they're going to be saying things like, hey, I'd love it if we could achieve this outcome in the next 2 weeks. And the developers will go, I bet you'd love if we could achieve this, but this is more realistic. So there'll be some kind of negotiation. So it's a conversation between the developers and the product owner. And what emerges is the sprint goal. So that emerges from that conversation. So the sprint goal emerges. The second part of sprint planning is around the what. Yeah. This is where items get pulled from that product backlog that relate to that sprint goal and they get pulled into the sprint. And the third part is the how. Yeah. Now, the how part, I always describe this as like this is the team's workshop for how it's going to achieve this goal. The design workshop. So it's very much the developers around a flip chart or on a mural board or whatever it is, kind of collaborating about how they're going to achieve those goals. They're going to be drawing designs. They're going to be talking about how they're going to test it and all of that kind of stuff. Now, through this second and third part, what starts to emerge is the team's plan. Yeah, and the team's plan for the sprint, we of course know as the second of the artifacts, which is the sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog is the artifact that starts to emerge. That will contain items pulled in from the product backlog. Some teams break that down into tasks, but you don't have to. Yeah. I think one of my key messages as well is around Scrum. Scrum is a very lightweight framework. Yeah. Beware of those kind of Scrum zealots who say, you need to break it down into tasks. You need to do it like this. Yeah. It's all about experimentation. Your process as a team emerges from your practice inside of the Scrum framework. Yeah. So actually, it's very, very lightweight. So sprint planning is the first event coming out of sprint planning. We've got an idea of what the goal is, and we've got a kind of rough idea. And it's a rough idea because we work in complex environments. That sprint backlog will change as we go through the sprint. Yeah, but our focus as a Scrum team is on achieving that sprint goal. Yeah. One of the things I've often seen going around teams is this idea. Maybe ever seen a daily scrum and nobody's actually listening to each other? I don't know if anyone's ever seen a daily scrum like that. And if you dig a bit deeper, what you'll often find is they're all working on different things. They don't have that cohesive sprint goal that they're kind of working to. One of the key origins actually of Scrum was a paper by two Japanese gentlemen. Takenuchi and Nanaka in 1986, the new product development game. And one of the things that they were talking around is they were looking at how we'd been doing product development. And they characterized the traditional way as a kind of relay race, where one group of specialists hands the baton to the next group of specialists, the kind of waterfall, if you like. And they were saying in 1986 that maybe, just maybe, this isn't, given how fast the world is moving, this isn't conducive enough for the speed of delivery that we're facing in today's world. Now, 1986, I wasn't working in 1986. Some of you may have been, but this was early days of email. You might have got 3 memos across your desk in 1986. I'm guessing when I did start working, I still used to get those paper memos across. So I am old enough to remember that. But if it was true then, it's kind of even more true now. The pace of change, the pace of the world is a lot faster even than it was in 1986. And what they were envisaging, rather than this relay race, was the collaborative game, where you've got all of the skills that you need on the same pitch. Yeah, within that group, within the Scrum team, within those developers, maybe you've got people from different organizations on the pitch playing the game together, passing the ball back and forth, moving down the pitch, trying to achieve. Well, I guess in rugby it would be a try, but that goal, think of any team sport, the kind of metaphor works. So it's that sometimes you have your skills, but sometimes you will need to play out of position in order to kind of help the team move down the field and be successful. It's a team game. That's at the heart of what Scrum is. So that's what gives us the focus at the end of sprint planning, and of course. What you are doing on a daily basis is the developers are doing the work. Absolutely. But then on a daily basis, we also have this idea of the daily scrum. Important thing about the daily scrum is it's by the developers for the developers. Yeah, the developers are the only mandatory attendees. Now, if I'm a scrum master, I'm probably going to be there because I care about my team and lots of interesting information might surface, especially if I'm in a distributed kind of environment. It gives me a chance to kind of connect with the team, but it's for the developers to synchronize their effort towards that goal that they have committed to. So the commitment comes from the developers to that sprint goal. So yeah, same time, same place every day, synchronization. It comes from this idea. Have you ever worked on a project and then towards the end of the project, somebody has this great idea? Wouldn't it be great if on a daily basis, now the pressure's on at the end of the project, we all got together and made sure we're in sync. Well, if you're in a team, it makes sense that you're in sync all of the time. Yeah. Now, if you're just working in pairs, daily scrums kind of don't make sense. But if you're a team of 7, 8, 9 people, it's your daily synchronization kind of point to kind of come together. So throughout the sprint, you're going to be, delivering the work. At the end, there is two more events. We have the sprint review and the sprint retrospective. The sprint review is about inspecting and adapting what the team have been working on, seeing where we are against that product goal. Oh, looks like we might need a couple more sprints to be able to achieve that goal. So you might be having conversations with your stakeholders. The important thing about the sprint review is involve the stakeholders. Invite anybody and everybody who cares about what you're working on, yeah, and be really, really open to the feedback. And if nobody shows up, it means nobody cares you're working on the wrong product. Okay, so work on something else. Yeah. So it is a good kind of yardstick for that. So that's inspect and adapt on the what, yeah, the product. Whereas, of course, many of you'll know the sprint retrospective is more your inspect and adapt point on how you are working as a team. This is your opportunity to improve. With a new team, for me, this is very, very important. Obviously, the third role that I haven't put on there is the one of the Scrum Master. Yeah. So our Scrum Master is our team coach and our organizational change agent. Of course, still for many years, the Scrum Master has been very misunderstood. It's been done as a part-time role, been done working across multiple teams. If you want to help a team become really, really effective, you need to be with the team. You are that team coach as a Scrum Master. And one of the first things that you're going to be doing with a new team is really helping them step by step work towards becoming effective. One of the things I would always go and do when I'm working with a new team is I would ask them questions like, what do you want to be in 6 months' time? What not your product goal, but what's your team goal? But what do you want it to feel like and be like in 4 to 6 months' time for this team? What would you want the CEO to say about this team? What do you want this team to be known for? Now, hopefully that looks even. Now, what you're trying to say as a team coach, as a Scrum Master, is you're good as you are, team, but I believe in you. You can be even better. My job is to help you achieve what you want to become. My job as a Scrum Master is not to implement Scrum on people. I'm a Scrum Master is not there to inflict Scrum. A Scrum Master is there to understand what are the challenges teams face and maybe explore, is Scrum the right option? Is Kanban the right option? Should we bring Helen in rather than having Mark around here to kind of help the team in this particular context? Scrum is not always the right answer. Yeah, it's absolutely not. But it's a great team if you think, it's a great little framework if you believe that you've got some wicked problems and complex problems, and you believe that a team is going to be greater than the sum of the parts, the outcomes that they can achieve, the innovation that they can achieve, the challenges that they can face together. That's why we build teams. But if you're working on, more complicated or even simple kind of issues, then maybe you don't need a team. Yeah, maybe a list of things to do will be enough. Yeah. Okay, so this is our Scrum Master, our team coach, and our organizational change agent. Scrum Master. So we've got all of our events now. We've got our sprint planning, daily scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. Coming out of the sprint, of course, is our increment. And our increment is the third one of our artifacts after the product backlog and the sprint backlog. It's kind of the outcomes that we are going to be delivering to our customer. Every time you take a product backlog item and turn it into a working piece of product, you are creating a new increment of your product. Yeah. And how do we know it's working? Well, ideally, teams have this idea of a definition of done. Think of your definition of done as like your commitment to quality. What does it mean to be done on for our product that we can play any of those increments against? This is really, really important. I mean, I've noticed my daughter has started cooking these days, and her definition of done is very different than my definition of done. When she's finished baking, the kitchen is still a complete mess, but she can eat the cake. My definition of done obviously would include putting the dishes in the dishwasher and wiping down the surfaces and things like that. So we've got a different definition of done. So here, this creates for the team a shared understanding of what do we mean to say something is done. And That, in effect, is really all the Scrum framework is. Lots of stuff get added to it, things like user stories, story points. That's not Scrum. Yeah. Scrum is a lightweight framework that you have to add things to. Yeah, but some of those practices that you add to Scrum might be good practices for a new team, but those practices often go stale quite quickly. It might be useful to do story point estimation and play planning poker with a new team, but you're probably not going to be doing that after 6 months. You'll find other ways of solving the same problems and stuff like that as well. So practices, the idea is as a Scrum Master, you are like the team's chief scientist, focusing on them on why are we doing things and is it adding value? And if it's not, ditch it and help them experiment and find new ways of working. Um, that's the basic baseline for Scrum. But any just general questions, especially maybe for some of those who are newer to Scrum, about the general Scrum framework?
One question. So you haven't. I see you've got a circle, so I'll say you've kind of included it,
Ooh.
but you haven't explicitly mentioned the retrospective or anything. Okay, is that?
Yeah, so
Do
the
I see
final
it doing?
final two events, I mentioned the sprint. So the last two things that you're doing at the end of the sprint is the sprint review, and then straight after you would be doing the sprint retrospective. They are the final events, and then of course what you're doing then is going
Yeah.
into the next sprint. Yeah.
Okay, so you're considering this. You're considering the retrospective as a key part of the Scrum framework in there. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
There are
Right.
there are five, just to summarize, there are 5 events in Scrum. The first event is sprint planning. Then on a daily basis, we are having the daily Scrum, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. They are the kind of 4 fixed events, or the metaphor that I like to use for them is workshops because they are active participation rather than even better than events. And then the fifth event is the sprint itself. That is like the container event. That's like your 2 weeks or 4 weeks that contains everything else that you're doing. So those sprints, those time boxes, they always begin with the sprint planning and they always end with the sprint review and retrospective. And then you'd go into, and there's no walk in between sprints. You effectively go into the next heartbeat, the next time box. Hopefully that makes sense for everybody.
Mark, I had a
Okay.
question. What was the rationale from changing from roles to accountabilities? Because one thing I've seen is that previously, when we talked about the roles, we would have a dedicated product owner, a dedicated scrum master. But now the word accountabilities, I'm seeing a lot of people saying, well, actually, this role of a scrum master can be done by lots of other people because they're just accountabilities of those other people. So what are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think the last version of the Scrum Guide was a drive to make it even less prescriptive. And so they were absolutely giving permission. Well, it doesn't have to necessarily be somebody who is dedicated to just being a Scrum Master. So yeah, it might be a developer, and you might be 50% developer and 50% team member. But what I think that's done is it's kind of devalued the role of good or if I dare say even great Scrum Mastery. I mean, when I started Scrum, I was the tech lead. And I put on the hat of being a Scrum Master, and I was going to play it in that way. I was going to be 50% team member, 50% Scrum Master. Maybe we've all been there at some point. And then I know in the first retrospective that I did with my team, I did a very simple retrospective, mad, sad, or glad, or something like that. And I literally had hundreds of sticky notes on the wall. And the team picked one of them. This is the thing that we want to improve in the next sprint. And I was like, well, who deals with all this other stuff? Lots of this stuff isn't even stuff the team can deal with. And that was when it clicked for me. It's the Scrum Master. That went into my Scrum Master backlog or my organizational change backlog. And that was the stuff that on a daily basis, when I wasn't needing to kind of coach or observe or support the team, I'd go and work on that kind of stuff. So yes, also your role as a Scrum Master, I know I'm expanding a little bit, Helen, your question, but I'm using it to kind of expand a little bit. Your role as a Scrum Master should change. Like we say with Scrum, if you're doing Scrum in 6 months' time, the same as you're doing Scrum today, you're not doing Scrum. Yeah, it's the same with Scrum Mastery. If you're Scrum Mastering in 6 months' time, the same as you're Scrum Mastering today, you're not really going to be very effective as a Scrum Master. To start with, you've got to be a lot more, kind of teaching, showing people how to do things. And then maybe stepping back into kind of more mentoring, kind of collaborating, guiding, maybe, and then take a step back a little bit further, and maybe taking more of a kind of coaching stance. So the way that you Scrum Master will change over time. So I think, in fact, it was a big failure pattern that I saw with some, and maybe you've seen some of these, Helen, as well. You might know who I'm talking about, but some kind of even very experienced agile people who kind of only had one mode of being an agile coach or a scrum master. They could only coach, or they could only be very, very directive. Yeah, the best scrum masters can really kind of dance and meet the team where they are. So that they're and that's why it's a job in itself. I was once working with a scrum master in a company in Ireland, and he said, "Mark, I'm the scrum master, but I'm also the team member. I'm the tech lead. Yeah, I'm like the team captain. I'm on the pitch. I'm showing the team how to play the game." I said, "Well, it's important that you have experienced people, in the Scrum team who can act as mentors for other people and raise everybody's skills. But the Scrum Master is more like the team coach. You're off the pitch. You're Pep Guardiola, whoever. Pick your favorite coach. You may be a former player, but you're off the pitch. You can see how the game's being played, game to game, sprint to sprint. Your job is to kind of hold the mirror up to help the team reflect on how it's playing the game to game, sprint to sprint."
Okay, I've got a few more questions in the chat channel for you, Mark.
Yeah.
So this is from SD31. Is sprint planning a necessary activity, or does it depend on the maturity of the team or the size of the teams? Is sprint planning necessary?
I think so. When I teach Scrum, which I'll be doing tomorrow, I teach Scrum like this from a framework perspective. But at its heart, I think of Scrum as a culture. And really, as long as you are continuously delivering value, let's say every couple of weeks, as a team. So if you're a team continuously delivering value, continuously driving risk, and continuously improving, you're doing Scrum. Yeah. At some point, you might find that, well, we understand the intent behind sprint planning. It's so that we can get focus. But maybe we want to decouple our planning from our retrospective cadence. But we're still delivering value every couple of weeks. Yeah. So for me, yeah, you're still doing Scrum. But beware, the problem is people stop doing things before they really understand the why they're doing them. Yeah. And that's when teams get into trouble. Yeah, that's the kind of hard bit. So yeah, mature teams that have been working for many, many years, what Scrum looks like in their environment will be very different from maybe even what I've described here. I can see Alan's put his hand up.
Yeah, apologies. Good Abend. I was going to go on to a different question. It's taken me that long to find where the raise hand button has gone these days. But I'd love you to speak a little bit more about the daily Scrum, Mark. It's like
Yeah.
you described it as a sync point, and I think my developers would love you for that because they can talk all day about all the stuff that they've been doing, whereas I prefer them to try and make out the plan for the next day. I believe that essentially the Jira board or the big visible chart is the mechanism for how we can sync up, rather than everyone getting on the same page by people talking about what they did yesterday for 15 minutes. Can you go into a bit more of that and how you approach the daily Scrum?
Yeah, but let me be clear about the way I'm using the word sync there, or synchronization. I'm not just kind of it's not just inspect; it's also adapt. So it's like, where are we? But what are we going to do as a result? What do we need to achieve today? And that's very important. Obviously, it needs to be really focused. And if you've got that sprint goal, that helps focus it, because everything that they are inspecting and adapting on, it should be related to that goal, and they should be holding each other accountable to that thing. One of the key things, of course, though, with the sprint goal is it really creates a safe environment where people can ask each other for help. So I remember, early days of me and Scrum, and kind of, we had a young developer who'd been working with us for 18 months, and before Scrum, we'd stuck him on support. We were all senior developers and we're very, very busy. And as a result, we hadn't spent enough time with this person. Now, actually, when you become a team member and having that shared commitment as a team, he's able to kind of, I'm struggling with this, can somebody help me? And it becomes a very safe, and it becomes in everybody's interest to help each other. Yeah, because that's that shared commitment that we're making as a goal. And the daily Scrum, the inspect and adapt point, really kind of surfaces that, and that's what you're trying to do as a Scrum Master, create that safe environment. I think, Alan, the fact that I mentioned the adapt point was maybe the key thing that you were kind of looking for.
Indeed, and thanks for the clarity that you just added to it. I will say that just in practical terms, and with apologies to everyone else, when you say everyone has skin in the game sort of thing, there can still be naked self-interest from members in the team. I think as a Scrum Master you have to watch out for. Like you mentioned, being a coach like Pep Guardiola, if you've got a bunch of devs that all think that they're Ronaldo, they're not going to be helping each other out. They're all trying to get the 2-foot tap in for themselves. So I think that's another interesting thing. That's an observation from the team. Probably got more things, but I'll make way for the rest of the cohort.
Alan's comment there reminded me of one of Ben's presentations at a Scrum gathering about the usual suspects and stuff like that. But yeah, we've definitely seen the hero developers in some of our teams and things like that. So, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I was just on the last comment. I think what you've been doing is something that's very important, because sometimes what you've been doing is sitting there doing nothing because everything's broken. And even if that's going to continue for a day or two, because there's a real good reason why it's broken and you're doing it, it's good that everybody hears that so that they know that there's someone there who isn't moving, and they should be going and occasionally giving them a little bit of support. So it's not just, the movement on the Jira board, but it's also the sort of, how are you feeling? What are you doing? How's it going? And that then goes into what's the plan for the day is being made in that meeting, depending on, who maybe needs a little bit of help, what's the communication, so on and so forth. And that's why it's got to be really, really about the developers. So if people are just talking about a plan for the future, then you maybe end up talking about the vision. Anyway, so that was the thought about what was the previous discussion. You more generally, right now, everything you're saying, you're moving away from an old Scrum that has a lot more stuff fixed in it. And can you sort of talk about what separates you from general Agile? Okay, so I would, if you start with Kanban or whatever process, and you have a bunch of people and they start to think about working together and doing whatever's necessary and adapting continuously and changing themselves. They might even decide that they want to do a two-week iteration because there's something they're delivering to customers who can work every 2 weeks themselves. They're just working in a very flexible way and taking account of things. Do you have a reason why you want it to be Scrum yourself? What would you sell the name of Scrum with?
I don't necessarily want it to be Scrum. I've worked in environment. Scrum is just one of the approaches to be agile. When I would choose to use Scrum is, if it's kind of complex work, and we believe that building a team around that kind of complex work, then Scrum is a very useful framework. Not the only one, but a useful, very simple framework to allow a team to learn to be a team. But I think of that as like, Scrum is like, a team learning to be a team, like the stabilizers on your bike. It's when you're learning to kind of, how do we work together as a team? If I think about, often when I enter organizations, less so now because people have worked in Scrum and worked in teams, but certainly a few years ago, and certainly as I work in different markets as well these days. And actually, as people have come back from COVID and come back to the office, there's certain people maybe who don't necessarily know how to work with people. So it's like sometimes to learn, you've got to learn to be a team. And Scrum is a framework that can help you do that. I think there's also a big problem though that Scrum has perhaps kind of made even worse is the fact that a lot of people think being agile is just about the team doing Scrum or Kanban or something like that. Most organizations won't be agile just by adopting Scrum. Especially in larger organizations, there's lots of things outside of the team that would need to change in order to kind of create business agility. So often when I go to organizations these time who want to be more adaptable, want to be more resilient, adopting Scrum might not be the right thing for them to do. But Scrum is a great little framework if you want a team to learn how to be a team in a complex environment.
I mean, when I started it, there was quite a lot of joking that in order to start working in Scrum, you need to have 3 years of experience working in Scrum because there's so much complexity and so many ceremonies and so on and so forth. Now, you've been saying the opposite, so I mean, I don't want to throw that at you, but it's yeah. I mean, I could you maybe expand on how compared to something simpler like Kanban, which also talks about teams and so on, what especially maybe what's in the newer ways of doing Scrum, that's helping with introducing people to those ideas.
Yeah, Helen, if I say anything incorrect about Kanban, do correct me because you trained me in Kanban probably a number of years ago, and it may have evolved since. But I remember Helen teaching me one thing about Kanban was it doesn't necessarily insist on teams. Teams are potentially because Kanban is an evolutionary approach to change. You visualize your system, and that's your starting point, and then through the other practices of Kanban, you evolve your system over time. And teams may form, but it doesn't mandate that you have to work in teams and things like that. So that's one subtle way that Scrum is definitely designed to kind of be a team-based framework. So if you're all working on different things, the problem with Scrum actually I find in a lot of organizations is they're not really working in teams. We call them Scrum teams, but they're just groups of individuals that we call teams for management convenience. Yeah, real teams have shared goals. Yeah, they have to work together in order to achieve those goals and create innovative ones. But I mean, that's one way that Kanban maybe differs from Scrum. Am I right, Helen? Am I still true? Correct me if
Yeah,
I'm
we
wrong.
start with what you do now. So if you work in component teams, if there's 10 teams involved in delivering a service, start
Yeah.
with what you do now. You probably will evolve though.
Yeah. Whereas, if that's evolutionary change, we often talk about Scrum. Maybe it's more revolutionary change because you do have these. I still think of these as roles because I think it's a two-step back to just think of them as accountabilities. So we do have these roles, and they have specific things that they're trying to do. So it's more revolutionary. Also, I don't like all the language in Scrum, but the reason for the different language is just to show it's different than other stuff. Um, I remember Mike Cohen. I remember a conference Mike Cohen saying, and he said this in 2008. Actually, he said, if in 10 years' time we're still talking about Scrum Masters and backlogs and stuff like that, we failed. Yeah. Now we're still talking about Scrum Masters and stuff like that. But his point there was like it should just become the way that we work, working in an incremental way. When we're working on complex things, we have teams swarming around, solving those wicked problems. That's just the way to kind of build products, at least with the viewpoint of like 2008. Now, I think actually what has happened is in lots of smaller product development type of organization, it has just become the normal way of working. But maybe in some of the, definitely some of the larger organizations are working, it's kind of one of the anti-patterns that I often have seen is this kind of dark Scrum, where Scrum makes lots of things transparent. That's one of the things that Scrum does. Information is very transparent in the work that is being done, in the work that's coming up to the team. It gives opens a lot of kind of levers for kind of those micromanagement in a way, which actually results in absolutely the opposite of what Scrum is meant to be. Yeah, so it actually removes the autonomy of the team. Scrum is meant to be an environment where about decentralizing control. The people who are closest to the problem actually being able to make the decisions that they should be able to make.
I've got more questions, Mark.
Okay.
So this one's from Becky. When sizing tickets, if there's a range of results, e.g., 2 people think it's 3 points and 1 person thinks it's 5 points, and 2 people think it's 8 points, split room, what's the best approach to landing the size? Do you take the 3 points, or should you give people the opportunity to explain why they voted 5 or 8? Or is it more using the Agile Scrum framework as a guide? So can you give us a little bit about that?
Obviously, referring there to kind of story point estimation, or maybe even using tools like planning poker and stuff like that. Just remember, if you're using tools like the real purpose and value you get out of them is the quality of the conversation. So you don't just vote again for just to kind of get the perfect number or something like that. It's like, oh, I might question if it's a span of maybe 3 to 8. I'd probably question those extremes and see if any useful information is coming out. So I might say Helen might holding up an 8, and I might say, Helen, why have we got an 8? And it's like, oh, I've worked in that area of the product before. The code's really smelly. And then Ben, why are you holding up a 2? I don't think we have to touch that at all. I think we can write a simple report. Everybody looks at the product owner. Yeah, that'll work for me, I think. Yeah. Okay, great. Then we might vote again. Yeah. But if you're not getting any new information, just go with the 5, go with the midpoint. It's about the story point estimation is about surfacing the information. Yeah. As long as you do the same thing every time and consistent, for things like forecasting, it doesn't actually matter how bad you are estimating. As long as you're consistently bad, you'll be able to use the ideas of story point and velocity to be able to forecast. So I remember Helen telling me a story. Oh, Helen, I'm giving you loads of credit here today, about a team she'd been working with, and management had insisted that they did 2 days worth of workshop, and Helen was like, "Don't bother investing 2 days to kind of estimate everything. Just call everything a 5." But they went ahead and did the workshop, and they were about 10 story points out. So it's, if you're doing that, it's the value of the conversations, not. And one other thing about estimation I always encourage my teams is what you should be doing is you should be involving the team in all conversations as work moves up that product backlog. Yeah. So, involve the team in creating the product goal, because they need to buy into it as well. You want to create that shared commitment. One Scrum Master I was working with, they had a rule of thumb that a team should have seen things at least 3 times as it moves up that product backlog. Once when it's just a dot on a roadmap and we need to say, yeah, it's a big thing. It's probably take us about 5 sprints. And then as it starts to get closer together, we need to start to break it down into maybe smaller chunks. And then maybe a week before we're about to start on that thing, really, really small slices before we're bringing it into the sprint. But because you're doing that, every time you're breaking it down, what I do is I play speed planning poker. So don't talk about a backlog item for about 15 minutes. What you do is just read the title out. And say, okay, let's vote on it. 3, 2, 1, every vote. Everyone's holding up a 5. You've just saved yourself 5 minutes of conversation. Yeah. So again, I know I've gone a bit broader there, but remember, it's about the conversation, not about trying to get the perfect number or something like that.
Perfect. So I have one from Greg. Also, good memory, Mark, for remembering that story. That's years old. How do you reflect on the latest updates to the Scrum Guide regarding the AI usage, but not only, also called the expansion pack? So it's not technically the Scrum Guide, but it's something else that one of the creators has done.
Yes, I believe Jeff Sutherland and yeah. one of the other people who was involved did send me that to kind of review it. Yeah, I mean, the only problem with the expansion, the point of the expansion pack, I believe, is if you are working in a larger organization, then the Scrum Guide isn't going to be enough. So it's meant to be a collection of patterns, I believe, and you're not necessarily meant to do all of the patterns. So I think if you dive in there and address it with that mindset, pick the ones that are going to work for you. But of course, as we know, when you were given lots of frameworks and things like that, and this is a more general problem with agility. When I started with Agile, and some of you started a long time ago, we didn't have so many frameworks and expansion packs and scaling frameworks and things like that. It used to be more like you had a problem, you kind of had the Agile principles, and being Agile meant about solving them in novel ways. Yeah, maybe we're drawing on things like feature-driven development and crystal methodologies or whatever it was. Some of the and externally from extreme programming, you might pull in some of those practices, but it isn't like you have to do everything. Yeah, so and I think treat any expansion packs and things like that in similar ways. I'm not sure if I've answered the question, but
so. I've also got another one from SD31. Can you suggest or point to some starting points of use of Scrum for teams that are not software development teams? Is this something that is done? Are there any case studies?
Yeah, there are lots of case studies, and maybe others can help me with this. Feel free to put any ones in the chat. So there's definitely case studies in uses in things like hardware and things like that. There was one from, and I don't know what the link is. The Johnson Control Group. They're the people. I remember them seeing a presentation for them at a conference. They build the seats for in cars. And what they were using it Scrum for was around fast prototyping of a way of kind of iterating around prototypes of the seats that they could ship to the various different customers and kind of get fast feedback loops and stuff like that. There's obvious examples of wiki speed and things like that in hardware environment, which is about how you build cars in agile ways and things like that. So have a look at those kind of cases from kind of wiki speed, and that's a lot of lean concepts in there as well, like keeping the cost of change low and stuff. So replacing big heavy manufacture big machines that you have to run for 10 years, and that's why your Honda Civic doesn't change that much. If you can replace those big expensive kit with some kind of easier, with a hacksaw, a $1 hacksaw, it gives you more flexibility in the way that you kind of manufacture your products. Building cars in a way that's kind of componentized, maybe, so you can kind of change an engine quickly and stuff like that. I've definitely seen things in Ericsson.
I always
Around.
remember that story from Ed Scotcher when they were building a police station and they built a cell, just one construction of a cell, and they found out so many things that they needed to do differently. It can fundamentally change their design. So you can even use it in construction.
Yeah, I've used it personally in marketing, quite a lot in marketing actually. Getting teams to work on marketing campaigns and things like that, and bringing together like marketeers, but technical people and stuff like that as well. I've used it in sales. I've used it in audit, Scrum in audit. If you Google Scrum in audit, you'll definitely find a few examples around that kind of thing as well. Any kind of problems that are how you would describe complex. And for those of you who don't necessarily know what I'm talking about, some of you will, when I talk about complex problems, I'm talking about where you've got lots of those unknown unknowns, where the solution is not knowable until actually after the event. That's when an approach like Scrum is appropriate, where you need to do experimentation. Yeah. So any context where you need to do experimentation might be an appropriate environment. Yeah.
Perfect. So I've got another one. Cool, we're really grilling you tonight, Mark.
Yeah, I had got a mural. I'd got a mural prepared and everything. I was going to do some group activities, but maybe a fireside chat is okay. Let's just keep the questions going.
What do you do when a company is mandating velocity as a key metric to use to measure delivery, and will compare teams' velocity output to question why one team is better than the other? So that's from Candice. What are your thoughts?
One thing I have done is if people are really mandating that we estimate work in terms of effort, cost, whether using story points or time, it doesn't really matter. What I will then insist is if we're going to have to estimate effort, what I am going to insist on then is we estimate value. Yeah. So get the stakeholders together and get them, like you might do relative cost, you might do relative business value. And then try and just focus, because that's much more useful than effort. Certainly for ordering your backlog, let's put that. Let's understand what the value is and things like that. And then what I would try and do is that then gives you an opportunity to start to talk to your stakeholders about value and things like that, about return on investment or whatever kind of things that you want. So over time, you can get people to focus on more of the right things. Yeah. So I just use it as an opportunity. Well, cost. Well, no point in just knowing cost. We also need to know value. So maybe start to work in those things. What I might do though and again, this will depend on the amount of influence you have in an organization. I guess as if you are a Scrum Master, one of the Scrum values is courage. How much courage you have as well in this day and age where maybe jobs are harder to kind of come by. You might not want to be that courageous. But you are there to kind of protect the team. So be as courageous as you dare to say, look, this is not how we're going to work as a team for these reasons. Maybe it's a chance to educate. But one of the key things though is you can't fight all of your battles all at once. So pick one thing that you're going to work on as a Scrum Master and work on that kind of thing. But it doesn't mean if people are insisting that you have to be patient as a Scrum Master. The other thing is start to observe what are the potential negative impacts that it's having on the team. Yeah, build a body of evidence. Yeah, and then at an appropriate time, you can then start to show that body of evidence and kind of work with people through that. One of my key change patterns actually within organizations is this idea of kind of navigate via tension. I don't think I've got a balloon. Where's a balloon? I've got a balloon. Here's a balloon. Yeah, here we go. So I don't know whether you've any of you ever read The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge. It's a systems thinking book. Ben's looking up on his bookshelf. You can see it. Mine's over there. It was core reading in the kind of 2000s. One of the key patterns that I use, both with teams but also with other groups within organizations, is this idea of navigate via tensions. So it's this. Imagine a rubber band. I've got a balloon. It works exactly the same as a rubber band. If you think of one end of the balloon, this is the current state. This is where we are now. As you kind of gaze into the future, maybe about where you would like the team to be, or maybe where you would like the organization to be, it's probably somewhere over here. Now, if you stretch that between the current reality and where you'd want to be, then you'll notice that the balloon is in tension. That tension is not necessarily a bad thing. It just is. It just exists. Now, there's a couple of things that we can do. We can either kind of take one small step towards that, and that might release the tension a little bit. Or we can say oh, that's just the way things work around here, and there's no tension anymore. But as positive change agents, we probably want to design one small experiment that will move. But you don't deal with loads of those things at once. You work with the team. What are the tensions that you're feeling as a team? What are the tensions within management that are causing them to mandate that we do story points and measure velocity? What's causing that? So go work with them, understand what's causing that, and then work with them to design what do we need to do differently that will take some of that tension away as well. So yeah.
There was one more question, but I think you probably need a little bit of context. So Jay is asking thoughts on Scrumban. You or anyone else tried Scrumban? Would you recommend it?
So I'll do it. I'll answer that in the controversial way. There's no such thing as Scrumban. There just is Scrum and Kanban, and they work great together. You can call it Scrumban. You can call it Scrumban if you want. I remember reading the book by Corey Laddis that was called Scrumban, just thinking this is common sense. Absolutely. So yeah, so when I'm doing Scrum, you don't just do Scrum because it's a lightweight framework that you need to add appropriate practices to. So I remember I was working in a company in Oxford once, and I remember going into this company, and now this company was slowly going out of business. And they were about a fifth of the size that they used to be. And I went in there, and the development manager showed me around. He goes, "Mark, this is where the developers are all kind of sitting." There was banks of four with all the backs to each other. You probably remember those days where we kind of sitting in banks of four with your back to each other. And he's like, they got headphones on. It's like, this is where the developers sit. They're thinking deep, important thoughts. It was like some kind of wildlife program. I got to be really, really quiet. So it wasn't collaborative. They weren't, they were just being managed by project managers and things like that. That's how they'd been trying to get control. They'd given up on that and they wanted to try Scrum. But they couldn't, they knew that they weren't going to be working in 2-week sprints. They weren't really able to form decent goals, and they knew that just working 2 weeks wasn't going to put enough pressure on them to kind of learn to work collaboratively. So on top of that, they said, okay, well, let's limit the working process as well. So now, which is obviously one of the kind of probably the second most important, it's the most important practice probably in Kanban, I would say, because if you don't do that, it's more, you've just got a visual management system. It's the thing that puts the pressure on to drive improvement within Kanban, but it can also help in Scrum. So absolutely, the guys decided we'll only work on 2 things. Now, they hadn't planned very well, and coming out of that first sprint planning was like, oh, heck, how do we only work on 2 things? And what I noticed was that 4 people went to a flip chart piece of paper, and they started sketching out ideas and stuff like that. And I looked at what they were doing, and it looked like some kind of design diagram. And there was a couple of testers. There was a tester there, an analyst, and maybe a couple of programmers. And they were talking about how they were going to solve the problem, how they were going to test it, and all that kind of thing. Then they split up. two of the developers, the programmers, started working together, and I think the analyst and the tester went off and fleshed out some of the acceptance tests. A couple of hours later, the programmers called the others over and they're like, "Have a look at this. What do you think?" The tester was like, "Oh yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's what we talked about." What have you been doing here? You insane? That's not what we talked about. They weren't getting that excited. I'm playing the story up a little bit. But you get the idea. It wasn't that kind of mini waterfall. It was kind of collaboration had started to happen. And that's what limiting the working process did. Also, things like your definition of done, they are explicit policies. Adding a definition of ready, you might choose to do that. It's not a core part of Scrum, but it's another policy that you might bring into your workflow as well. So, yeah, absolutely. But that's not Scrumban. That's just Scrum and using Kanban. And not just that, if you work in a software environment, you're probably going to be using extreme programming. If you're working in a hardware environment, you're probably going to be using some of the concepts from lean manufacturing and bringing in them into your approach as well.